Hi all, thank you again for tuning in. We're having a wee chat, Geoff and I, about what we're going to do with World War One and the scenario booklets and order of battle booklets that we're going to be providing. We're going to do it in much the same format as one of our big games like Barbarossa, because these games are there's not as big as that, but they're certainly way bigger than Balkan Fury. On the two West Front titles, Home by Christmas and Armistice. Now the key thing is there's going to be a split. There has to be a split date. So 14 through to the middle of 16 thereabouts will be in Home by Christmas, and obviously to the end of the war will be an Armistice. That's not rocket science. Now in the TFWW series, I tend to look at a scenario as being a small thing and a module being a bigger thing. That's why we have scenarios and modules listed in our OB books. So a scenario might be something to teach you how basic combat works. It could just be 2 or 3 counters, do some math, roll a die, see what happens. You've learned how to kill things in the game system. Equally, it could be a very historic event. So something like Dogger Bank might be a naval scenario we want to do, because it's fairly compact and we could probably walk people through to teach them how to operate fleets and all the various squadrons and detachments and so on that are necessary with that in the OB booklet. The question Geoff just hit me with before we started the video, I think is a really relevant one. And that is, what should be a scenario in this game and how to define it? Because World War One had so much attritional stuff going on all of the time, there's a problem potentially differentiating between just generic loss rate because these forces are so close together and lobbing artillery each other pretty much all the time on the more active parts of the front, to be fair, and what is a determinable offensive. So there's 2 ways I've got of looking at that. One is if you go to something like Wiki and pull up World War One, there are specific battles every year where both sides or one side prepared and launched a determined attempt to break the line or to retake ground, having had their lines at least bent back. The second one would be just to take a look in a history book and pick the top, we'll just say 4 or 5 battles every year. There should be enough information kicking about if we do some digging to put that together. Geoff, what do you think, more specifically about the ground stuff? Because the naval stuff I do believe is fairly well defined at Jutland, Dogger Bank, a couple of the things with U-boats sinking 3 British armoured cruisers and that kind of thing, which should all either be really good learning scenarios or be really tightly defined. That's a battle. There, you can play that separately if you want. What do you think we should be doing with these scenarios and modules that we're obviously going to put into the game other than just the grand campaign?
Well, I agree. I mean, I'm looking at Wikipedia now, and I'm looking at, say, you've got the really big stuff. You've got your Passchendaels, you've got your Somme. Then you've got Battle of the Boar's Head, 30th of June, 1916.
Right.
Wow.
Okay.
2 battalions by the British.
That one probably doesn't even signify in at our scale. I have a feeling, but it's part of Neuve Chapelle, isn't it? Is that not part of a bigger battle?
Yeah, and this is the thing. Right, let's see. Conducted north of the Somme.
During the Battle of the Somme, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's a holding action.
Yeah.
The Fromel's assault might be more interesting. Just mentioned there. This is the problem we're going to have with this. Some of it, I think we're going to have to be quite selective.
Yeah.
I think we can potentially create 3 1914-16 major campaigns, potentially. Or at least fairly big modules straight away in 14. You've got the initial invasion through Belgium and the BAF plus the French armies supporting, stopping the advance as best it could. You've then got the Lorraine offensive, which the French launched right at the beginning of the war. And that's we're probably able to lock that into a fairly small area and show the German counter-assault, which kicked them back out. And then obviously the Grand Campaign. After that, we might want to try and get a frontier trace or frontline trace for the Battle of the Marne and the big French counterattack. So that gets you 3 big ones in 14. I wouldn't really want to do too much more in 14 because you've got August, September, October, November. You've got 5 months.
Yep.
What do you think of those choices there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the what I find interesting about the initial campaign is that there is a lot of maneuver. And as I've been doing the French army, looking at the divisions, it's very interesting seeing how much they go to this place, this place, this place. So hopefully it'll be fairly simple to simulate over a period of 2 weeks. They go from here to here. Keep it simple. Don't worry about the stuff in between. But at the same time, there are so many little encounter battles. I do hope we'll be able to have maybe a slice of that initial 3 or 4 months, and we say, right, here we have infantry versus cavalry. Play this out as a scenario. Here we have a purely cavalry encounter. Play this out as a scenario.
We can certainly
hopefully that
pick. We can probably pick elements of those operations and plug that in to a learning module, because it wouldn't be big enough to hold someone's attention unless we did it at a tactical level.
Exactly. Yeah.
The other thing is we've got the race to the sea, and that might be worth looking at. But I'm not sure how we could do that without using the Marne as the start point, because the line was already solidifying down towards Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken, as that kicked off.
Yeah.
But that would be one, especially if we can get a frontline trace after the Marne, before everything glued up, and have some idea how badly beaten up the units on both sides are, because I know neither side was in particularly good shape after the summer and the autumn campaign, and just show the race to the coast. And if players can break the line, which they shouldn't be able to because of the damage that everyone suffered, it would be useful to show that. In 15, there's a lot less happens than people realise. But you've got First Champagne, you've got the German, their volunteer offensive, which gets slaughtered up in Flanders. Their equivalent, the Palace Battalion's got an absolute pasting there. You've got Neufchâtel, second Ypres, second Champagne, which was the French trying to break the line there. Lose Artois, the application of gas for the first time. I think the gas thing's probably a learning scenario to show people how weapons of mass destruction fit into this scale. Because fundamentally, whilst they're horrifying and absolutely horrific and did inflict casualties, they are not the defining way you broke through that everyone thought they would be. The Germans never broke a line by firing, letting gas off, neither did we. It was a combination of things. Combined arms broke lines. So we might get 1, 2, probably 3 or 4 out of 15. Now that gets us, plus a couple of smaller ones, maybe as learning things or just as for interest there. That would get us up. We're already at 10. Now, normally in these games, I try and get somewhere between 20 and 30 scenarios and modules. And I want to have some of the big naval things. Jutland in particular is a must-have as a set standalone. And there's a couple of other naval potential encounters that almost happened with the great fleets, where one side or the other cocked up and nothing happened. And we know that the Germans tried a couple of times to get the convoys the British were running at Scandinavia. And again, through cock-ups and poor judgment, things didn't go well. And if you've got enough information about the escort force and what elements the Grand Fleet and the High Seas Fleet put out to sea to do things relating to that, that might be a really interesting what-if scenario from a naval battle perspective. In 16, we do need to think about where we're going to break the game. In other words, where does the where is the end of Home by Christmas and where is the beginning of Armistice? Right, so there's a game turn there. And I've got one and I'm thinking Home by Christmas ends on February 1, 1916, game turn. And Armistice starts on the February 2, 1916 game turn, because that happens to be the day Verdun starts.
Right. Interesting.
That's one possibility. Now, the other one, it's part of the Ypres thing, that's fairly small. No. Vimy Ridge. Possibly there.
May.
It's May. And the Somme is quite, no, the Somme's the 1st of July. That's another historic breakpoint I've used a lot in games, by the way, is that, especially because of the way the Eastern Front works, with the attack into the Soviet Union in World War II being on the June 2 game turn of 1941, and given that Kursk starts in 43, beginning of July, it provides a really good breakpoint. And for those people who don't study World War II, basically not a whole hell of a lot happens in May, June, and July, other than Kursk. Because the British and the Americans have cleared North Africa at the end of May. There's 2 months of nothing, and then you start getting stuff like Sicily in August and September, and the invasion of Italy. So it's a really convenient breakpoint there. World War I does not have as many breakpoints. And the whole point of the Somme, as I understand it, was it not meant to happen later than it did? Because we were still building up, and it was brought forward to take the pressure off Verdun.
Can't remember. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Let's see. Yeah. There is certainly a lot of French pressure for the British to do something, in air quotes. And I think that's one of the reasons why the British experienced serious problems at the very beginning. Because not quite enough work has been done. Though it should be noted that the British do a lot of preparation in secret, and it's very effective at throwing off the Germans. It's just that the initial waves, just they simply don't stand a chance. They haven't been given enough preparation on taking those trenches.
And I think we need to look in a little bit more detail at Verdun, see if there's a gap. Because I know there are pauses in the worst of the fighting there. So what we could do, and I think it's really important to consider this, is use the Somme. We're a British company after all. Use the Somme as a start point for Armistice. Which I think is quite a good idea.
Yes.
If we do that, there is a possibility there that we could it gives us the traditional, as it were, in gaming terms, mid-year breakpoint. So we run Home by Christmas up to the second turn in June, end at the end of that, start this there, and start Armistice in July. Because all the build-up's done.
That means you get Jutland in Home by Christmas, and then you get the action of the 19th of August in Armistice. So you get the potential for 2 very large naval battles to be played out.
There you go. So
Yeah.
if any of you out there, by the way, want to comment on this, shove it in the comments down below or send us an email because we are interested. This is important for us to try and get it right. You can tell we haven't looked at this in huge depth. I did look some time ago, and I'm pretty sure I came up with the first Somme as being the key one. Because that is really when the Allies go over to the strategic offensive in the Western Front. And it sticks. There may be German attacks going on at Verdun, there may be further German attacks later on, but when you look at 17, pretty much every attack is Entente. So you've got Anchor, which is ANCRE Ancre, which is part of the preparations of the Battle of Arras. Again, the Germans do launch Operation Alberich. Let's have a look at this. Strategic withdrawal to the Hindenburg Line. Guys, do you really want to play a strategic withdrawal? The only thing about that might be some option where the Entente get wind of it and are able to pursue closely enough to discombobulate the German retreat, but frankly it's only 1 hex roughly, or 2 hexes at most, because they straighten their line. That's pretty much it. So that's a retreat. The Nivelle offensive is huge. Messines is also quite a big attack. So it's not huge, but looking at a quick map, it's pretty much the whole of 4th Army, and it might be quite an interesting learning or, module, because we do need to have learning stuff in each of the games, Geoff. So 17, until you get to Passchendaele and possibly Cambrai and so on, there's not as many offensives, there's not as many battles, but they're bigger, the ones, the main ones. And of course, in 1918, you've got Operation Michael, etc. And I think for our American clientele, it's crucial we do Belleau Wood. I was looking at it, it is actually a huge operation with 3 or 4 French armies with roughly 1 US corps per army attached. So it's quite a large operation, bigger than I thought, and we could probably take a snapshot out the front line there and show the impact of the US forces being deployed, if not en masse, but certainly in some significant numbers for the first time. And obviously we can then get into a discussion about which of the primary operations when the British and the French and the Americans smash the German line and break through. So there'll be 4 or 5 there. So getting our 20-ish scenarios is not really that hard in the West. And I think that gets us there. Now, the key thing, guys, we have quite a lot of unit ratings. I did have a look the other day. We do have quite a few of them done by Corey and Matthew Manka. But we do need to get a bit more input on that, and we certainly need to look at air unit ratings. I keep saying that, and the reason I've shied away from it is we can either get really complicated and do really fancy maths, or we can leave the fancy maths for what kills ground units, which makes a lot of sense because that's basically a lethality. In there, we can come up then with some very good comparators, which certainly in the first couple of years, you don't really need air forces. By the time of the Somme, you do. There's so significant numbers of aircraft kicking about. Yes, they're pretty pathetic in relation to a Stuka or a Typhoon, but you get the point, guys. There's enough planes to make a difference. But in World War I, effectively, most aircraft are 1 or 2 machine guns, and if they carry bombs, they don't carry huge numbers of them, but they carry enough with a high enough sortie rate that it adds up. And if you look in the World War II games, some of the more antique, shall we put it, aircraft in the game are not that much more advanced than the stuff at the end of World War I. And we know what they rate. But we need to show more granularity, because that late war aircraft that we're suggesting is not too far different to some of the stuff in World War II. It's, made with a wood frame, it's got a fairly powerful engine, got a few machine guns and some bombs hung off it, and it's covered in usually not metal, but in World War One, but in World War Two, maybe a mixture of metal and fabric. You get to the general idea that these biplanes are not that much different. And of course, if you get something that's got a two ground attack rating, that's essentially a couple of machine guns and a few bombs. Really, all that is per aircraft. So in World War One, where these things are fresh and new, it's probably, I would suggest, until people get used to it, that wee bit more intimidating for the ground forces. But we have to be careful that we get the ratio of firepower there correct. At no point during World War One, to the best of my knowledge, do people have the equivalent of a Ju-87 or a Val or a Dauntless or a Typhoon or a P-51 or a P-47 or one of the ground attack FW190s or an IL-2, all of which can carry significant bomb loads and have high sortie rates. Therefore, you get some pretty impressive ground support numbers. So I'm not hugely concerned, but I'm also very aware that we need to be a bit careful with some of these ratings. But if you imagine in World War II terms, pretty much everything's going to be a 1A, 1 or 2, or a 2F1, or a 2F2, or a 2F3, or a 3F2. So we need more granularity to show that a 9-decker is dramatically better than the rubbish that the other side have got, but it's actually really garbage in comparison with a late war SPAD. And that's kind of the difference between a Gladiator and a P-51 in World War II, or a Focke-Wulf 190. And I'm not even going to mention the ME-262, which is, again, better again. So that's the only thing we need to really look at there. The naval stuff is just a case of plugging numbers in. I hate to say it. It's not fun, but it can be done. Rating it is not that. It's tedious, but it's not difficult. So once Geoff and I negotiate all these scenarios for you guys, we will publish a list through Facebook, and we'll probably do a video to walk you through in a bit more detail about what they're going to be. Last Malvinas. Well, I need to share my screen. So the reason I'm doing this so you guys can see it, these are the OLIs, and these are some of the unit ratings. So we know that a rifle company is 480 points. We don't have a support company. Sorry, we know rather that, I think that's a rifle company there. We know the general ratings that we're going to have for some of the stuff. So I need to spend a bit more time with that and give Geoff a list tied into the OB of all the unit ratings that he needs to spread through Last Malvinas so we can get to the artwork. We get similar information for our friends the Argentines right here. I've built the odd thing here and there. My issues, tax returns. As soon as I get them done, as soon as I get a day off to relax, out the way, I'll get this done and get over to Geoff. And that then builds us a pretty solid set of data for the game. Geoff's OBs are complete. It's just a case of plugging these numbers in, and then he and I can draw lots. Probably me does the artwork for this one because it's probably easier for me to do this one and give Geoff a bit more time mucking around with World War One stuff, to be honest. If I can get the artwork done for this, it's 3 or 4 counter sheets. It's not a big deal. Shouldn't take too long. Then we can get that out to proofing. If you guys want the same map coloration that we've got currently, please email or comment in the link below. Comment below, because my plan currently is to change the coloration and the font on the maps. So it will differentiate between the wars from TSWW, and actually World War One will get slightly different fonts as well. And yes, thanks to Bob, the software can do that. Effectively, that's all I've really got to say about Last Malvinas. And have you got anything you want to add, Geoff, or have I covered most of it?
Not really. I mean, everything's in down to the only Royal Navy thing not in is a dispatch boat, which I have no idea if that'd be useful or not. I don't care. I've got all the scenario stuff in. Everything down to a couple of special forces encounters, which were 25 men on either side, but it's still kind of important because 25 men, they have the capability to put a rocket into a Chinook if it gets too close, so be careful with that one. Yeah, everything's. There is one thing. Actually, no, two small things that do need to be done. I need to have a quick look through the BBC's regular broadcasts telling everybody where the British were. Just need to chuck that in. On this day, the World Service decided to be very, how do I say this, apolitical and tell the Argentines where the task force was. And then, it's just crazy. And then the other thing, I just need to talk to you about the map. Just make sure we've got the movements. We were talking about it on the way to that rock concert.
Yeah. We might tweak the map, guys, and move one of the promontories where Port Stanley's at slightly further into another hex. It kind of distorts it a little bit too much for my liking, but if we need to do that, it essentially means that you have an attack to take Longdon and so on round Stanley, and then you have a theoretical additional attack if you need to clear Port Stanley the hard way. And that might be worth looking at. And it might be worth actually moving Port Stanley to where the airport currently really is on the map, which would get us that 2-hex attack to finish it off. And the important thing there, guys, is the 2-hex attack actually never happened. The Argentines gave up before we started to forcibly liberate Port Stanley. It smacks, in my view, somewhat of some of the Italian surrenders. Particularly in the desert, where cut off from resupply, they gave up rather than go thirsty, which, to be fair, I can understand. But they aren't going to go thirsty in friggin' Port Stanley. They had a lot of supplies lying about. It was a mammoth supply dump had been built up. But I think demoralisation had taken its toll. And I don't know how much proper combat power was there. Like all armies, the Argentines are fairly modern, will have a big tail.
The Argies did have, I think they had at least 2 regiments, because they were expecting an assault by sea. So they had at least 2 regiments hanging around in Stanley. But fundamentally speaking, it came down to the fact that the British had kicked their asses on some of the easiest to defend terrain in the world. And they'd done that at night. And so when Menendez is getting told, well, boss, we've got a couple of hundred men coming down, quite a few are not coming down, and you've been hearing various commanders getting a bit panicked over the development around Longdon and Tumbledown, etc., etc. That's 2 nights where 2 to 3 sets of positions each were taken.
Yeah.
So there comes a point where Menendez is saying, well, what's the point in having a fight in the town where the British have the high ground? And it's just, I don't know if the Argentines could even do city fighting, because what kind of city are you fighting in? It's basically a bunch of porter cabins, for goodness sake.
Yeah, you've got that. And you've also got the fact that at that point, the British tails are up. They've shown twice, maybe even 3 times, combat efficiency is significantly better on the British force's side. They appear, at least in Argentine minds, to have a fairly unlimited supply of artillery ammunition, which if you read the books, they really don't, but they're very clever about the way you use it. They tend to keep Argentines' heads down with the odd gun here and there, then only barrage fire when required. Their Air Force had pretty much given up resupply flights, and with artillery able to target the runway, resupply was not going to happen that way. The Argentine Navy had been pulled out to a large extent. Speaking of which, your British dispatch vessel is utterly irrelevant to the game, don't worry about it. Unless someone really wants it, in which case you can find it yourselves, guys, because we ain't going to do it because we don't need it. Oddly enough, the Argentines, if they had something small and fast that could get in and out the Falklands, we might want to track that. But generally speaking, that we know they don't. So the Argentines have effectively just given up. And one does wonder what might have happened if they had utilised their Type 42s to support the operations a bit more. But there is a clear indication that the whole lot are sent back to Argentina to do coast defence. And whilst I don't know for sure, I would not be surprised if at least one of the Type 42s, and probably both of them, are in the River Plate protecting Buenos Aires against the non-existent threat of a Vulcan strike.
Mm.
You know, I'm saying non-existent, guys, because the British government were very clear that internally that they were not going to attack the mainland. So that's pretty much it for this, I think. Yeah, anything you want to add to this before we end the meeting and the recording?
I'm going to have a couple of what-if scenarios. What if the Argentines had decided to attack on the 25th of May and try and disrupt the British landings, even though it was far too late for that, but what hope. So basically a death ride of Vincenzo Di Maio and the Type 42s, and just try and take out Invincible and Hermes.
That would be, that'd be a really interesting one to try and game out. I'm aware that the British Task Force had a whole lot more ships with Exocet than people might think. And it might have been a very short and interesting trip for the Argentine Navy. But if they were able to
use Exocet, I know the name of the scenario for that now. Who's laughing now?
Write that down. That's a good one. We'll put that in. So yeah, and actually we may have one ship and one submarine that's got Harpoon on it. I'm not so sure about the ship, but I'm fairly convinced that one of the 3 SSNs actually had Harpoon. It only have had maybe 4 at most on board, and they were launched through the torpedo tubes, not through a VLS. But Harpoon's a lethal weapon. And I think someone might say to me that's a movie series, but there you have it. Anyway, guys, I think we'll knock this in the head. You've got a fairly good idea now of the minor problems we've got trying to work out where the split is between the 2 World War I games. You're aware we've got some ideas from what ifs. My personal favourite what if for Last Malvinas, by the way, is what if the Americans decided to do it and just use B-52Hs? You can work out that that means a whole pile of cruise missiles, and it basically means no game. But it would be sure fun just to blow everything away with that. Anyway, have a great evening, great day, great morning, whichever one suits. And thanks for tuning in. Speak to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.